on Tuesday, and I hope to try to finish this second chapter talking about biomes and so forth. And this isn't complicated material at all, but we're trying to create an awareness with you about the differences in the crops or the land use over the system worldwide. As we talk about this, we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the differences in the area that exists between deserts and forests, and that's usually an area that we call grasslands or savannas. And the area there doesn't have tree growth because it's limited by the volume of water that's there. It's not enough water to have much tree in the way of plant growth, but it does provide an area where there's a lot of low growth grasslands, and that's what we mean by grasslands and savannas.
I do have a question. Please. I've noticed in some deserts there are usually at least a few trees just literally out in the middle of the dunes. How exactly does that happen?
It happens to be a variety or species that is very well adapted to low water usage. And they're usually not big trees. They're not usually very productive.
This big.
Yeah, they tend to be more of a shrub type thing. You'll get some cactus and things of that type that will make efficient use of the available water. So it's just stuff that is suited to an environment that exists there.
And one last thing on the thing of cactuses. Their needles, what are those classified as?
It varies with the variety. Some of them are an appendage that does not separate. Others are a needle that will separate, will stick you and pull away. So I can't really answer your question exactly because there's so much variation in those species. And some of them, particularly the more barrel type cactus, the needle has actually got a hook on it. So if it happens to penetrate you, it will not come out. It's like a fish hook. So it's a real, it's a mechanism they have for survival though.
To keep predators from getting into their water.
Right. I'm going to skip over a little of this stuff. It's all in the PowerPoint talking about this because we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about it. But the areas that we're talking about are created by different convergence of winds. The winds that carry moisture in and will also prevent moisture from coming in. So it makes a totally specialized environment. There are certain areas of the world that are almost void of any sort of vegetation because of, one, in the southern hemisphere, around the 60th parallel, there's not much land. Most of it is water or ice. So there's nothing for plants to grow in. The diversity is very low because of the low temperatures. And we've also got area around the North Pole, which is categorized as a tundra. And it is very limited as far as plant production, although there is some plant production there. But it occurs in the uppermost layer of what soil is there because it's frozen most of the year. But permafrost. But there's a period of time in those land masses that it is thawed, and it will allow for some low vegetation to occur. As we talk about these things, the crop production or vegetation that occurs is limited by the environmental conditions that exist. whether it be cold temperatures and or water. You can have haymaking in some of these areas or small farms that produce fruits and vegetables. In a lot of these areas where we have soils of this type, drainage is a major problem, particularly in these more remote or northern hemisphere areas. A lot of that ice is there, and because of the land structure and the way it's put together, you may have some thawing of the land, but there's an ice layer underneath it, so you don't get drainage. And that's going to limit the amount of vegetation or plants that are there. They're subject to a lot of harsh conditions, which prevent them from growing any sort of volume of plant material. Plant productivity is defined by the amount of carbon dioxide taken from the atmosphere by photosynthesis. As we all know, the equation for photosynthesis, you take carbon dioxide and water in the presence of light to produce carbohydrates and oxygen. So, the thing that we use to measure photosynthesis is the use of the carbon dioxide. And that carbon is fixed by photosynthesis and measured in terms of plant productivity.
I actually have a question regarding carbon dioxide. If you were to put a plant in a sealed drain and just fill it with pure carbon dioxide, would it grow any better than just out in the natural environment?
You've created an artificial situation by doing that. And I don't know that it would thrive. Now, in commercial greenhouse production, where they're wanting to maximize production, you've got light and water provided, they do add supplemental carbon dioxide, but it's in a fluid system where it's open to exchange. They just, instead of adding additional fertilizer, they'll put in a CO2 gas, which provides an opportunity for the plant to pick up more of that to increase the photosynthetic activity. But as your question, the way I envision it, it would be a confined, refined area that I don't think is going to function properly. Okay.
Plants also require oxygen for respiration, don't they?
Sure they do, but a lot of it comes from the plant themselves. But it's not a sealed system that we're talking about. As we try to evaluate these different biomes that we talk about, the two that are most productive are the tropical forests and the tropical savannas. They produce about half of the terrestrial productivity on about a fourth of the land. So as we're talking about those, the tropical forests and tropical savannas are the most productive. The temperate forest is next. It contributes about 10% of the productivity on only about 7% of the land. Then we're looking at what we call the boreal forests and the temperate grasslands and the cropland. They are the next three in respect to productivity. And they are essential to what we survive on with the cropland and the temperate grasslands. The other three, the lower producing areas, are the tundra, the desert, and then there's one category that they talk about being urban. There's actually more productivity in the urban area than there is in the desert, and about equal to what there is in the tundra. When we mean urban area, that's cities as far as productivity goes. I'm going to make a statement, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. Annual crops are wasteful of primary productivity because most of the fixed carbon is removed at harvest and must be fixed again the next year. We're talking about annual crops. Now, would you think, and this we're talking about just in terms of productivity, would you think about annual crops being categorized as being wasteful?
Not really.
All right. Try to think of an example. Let's think of pumpkin plant as an example. If you're familiar with pumpkin production, it's a green plant that goes up and vines out over a wide area. And the only thing that you harvest is what pumpkins that plant does, what it produces.
Natural pumpkin itself.
And you just harvest that pumpkin. And then that plant, the vine, dies away, and there's nothing gained. So in respect to the annual harvest, a majority of that growth is wasted because you're only harvesting that pumpkin.
In that aspect, yes, but at the same time, once it dies, it also returns a lot of nutrients to the soil.
We weren't going there. We were just talking about the actual plant productivity. So you're right, but the statement was that plant productivity is wasteful for annual crops.
Well, in that context, yes.
That's all I was trying to do, trying to create an awareness with you. Now, it's different with perennial crops because they have to allocate part of their productivity to their survival. So if we're looking at a peach tree, for example, it has a growth structure. It grows, produces leaves, flowers, and peaches. So you harvest the peach, but the plant also adds growth to its structure. So in perennial crops, you don't lose everything that you get that was gained during that growing season. That's all I'm trying to do is compare an annual versus a perennial. It's just a little different approach, different thought process as we look at the annual versus the perennial. That's all I'm talking about. Because the perennial does do something to add to its survival for a coming year, where an annual crop, as you say, that dead plant material goes back into potentially minerals and organic matter that will be in reserve in the soil. But the plant itself goes away. That's all I'm trying to do. Okay? Create an awareness. It's always interesting to me as we look at different plants and plant structures and how they perpetuate themselves. And it's true as we look at all of these different biomes because of the plants that are specifically grown in those areas. We're talking about the savannas or the grasslands. The only thing that's growing there is low vegetation that is potentially used by animals and things of that type. So it's just humans have a history, a long history of moving plants and organisms around. And whether we like it or not, some of that's positive, some of it's negative. Johnson grass. How many are familiar with what I'm talking about when I say Johnson grass?
I know it as
Johnson?
Never heard the term.
Please?
I know it as in hay.
Okay. Johnson grass is a very prolific weed species. When I was your age, had no knowledge of Johnson grass and wasn't in any area. But some one, somehow, Johnson grass, and I don't know where it came from. I think it came from out west, out in the Midwest. But it's gotten transported into our area, particularly where we are. I assume it's down in Southside also. But Johnson grass is a perennial grass that is spread by not only seeds but vegetative portions and rhizomes. And in our area, if you travel down the highway, there's just masses of Johnson grass that are in the guardrails, right outside the guardrail. If you happen to let it get started in a pasture, it will actually take over your pasture. Cattle will not graze it, and it's in its vegetative form. There are a few folks that are managed to cut it for hay before it seeds, but it's a plant that someone has moved into our area, and now it's being spread by birds. It has a real frilly, light seed head, but small birds like that seed and they'll eat that seed. But as they move and travel, that seed passes through the bird and it's redeposited somewhere, and that's all it takes to generate another clump or cluster of Johnson grass. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about with the way people and organisms move around, whether it be accidentally or intentional. Johnson grass is a plague in my eyes.
I looked it up and it says Johnson grass is native to the Mediterranean region.
Mediterranean region, which means what?
And it now grows throughout Europe and Middle East.
Okay. We got it too. Do you have it in Southside?
Yes, sir. Some of our most productive hayland is land that's in Johnson grass.
Really?
Yes, sir.
What's it look like?
Very tall.
Oh, kind of like with.
It's tall. It in its early stages it resembles a small corn plant, but it'll cluster. It's if you're harvesting for hay, you must be cutting it, in a juvenile stage. Do you harvest it for hay?
Yes, sir, we do, and that's right now we haven't put a lot of fertilizer down, and that's the one thing that's still pretty productive.
Thank you.
It is productive. It produces large volumes of plant material, but it's also invasive in our area because most of the folks don't want it. It's a nasty weed as far as we're concerned.
It's interesting how one man's weed can be another man's crop.
You're absolutely right, and there you go. Somebody's got a picture of it up there.
Yeah, I did that.
Thank you.
Oh,
So
You did well.
you learn to know it, live it until somebody else talks and it goes away.
That stuff grows in my woods.
Yeah, it's as long as you're cutting it when it's tender, you won't have that stalk. The stalk will get real woody and heavy, and it's not very palatable for animals. But it's I've got a neighbor that had an opportunity to cut in a hayfield that was full of this, and he did cut it, but he wouldn't take it home. He gave it to somebody or sold the hay to somebody because he did not want it. He didn't want the potential for that to become take over his land. So it's this difference in the point of view and the way it's used. That's one of the key. You have found a way to use that as a plant where we don't handle it that way. We prefer to have a fescue or a clover type hay.
Over in my yard.
What is,
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Ayers, what is cassava, is on page 27 where it says, such as the Irish who grew potatoes in the 19th century and the 10% of the world's population that today depends on cassava for its nutrition.
I'm not sure. I couldn't blow smoke and tell you I do. No, but I don't.
I'll share my screen in a second. I've pulled up some cassava on Google.
Thank you.
Is everybody seeing it?
It's like a potato.
There you go. I was gonna say I thought it was similar to a sweet potato, and it is a root type product that is grown, I think, in more southern areas than what we are, more tropical areas.
Miss Reed might be able to- I think she was talking about that before. Irish.
Which the Irish probably got to growing the cassava when they had the potato famine,
Right.
all the other famines it was like the 1840s. It was big time famine, killed like 3/4 of the potato crop. And that was a big part of their diet. And also they were probably looking for anything else they could grow because it was a famine, and I can't remember what, some kind of disease got into the potatoes, and it just, that's why so many Irish ended up coming to America in the mid to late 1800s, because they were fleeing, because the Irish economy, the entire European economy went away, and that helped lead to the revolutions of 1848 that you can learn about in your history classes. But anyway, I was just listening to something about that a week ago, so.
Yeah. It is a root type crop.
Cyanide?
No,
He said no.
but it's more subtropical.
It's a woody shrub native to South America,
Mm-hmm.
extensively cultivated as an annual crop in tropical and subtropical regions.
It's an annual crop that means it's wasteful.
Third largest source of carbohydrates
Oh, okay.
behind rice and corn.
Yes. Wow. You're not a doer. I'm sorry. I'll stop. Anyway.
I think Tom may have answered your question better than I could. It's what I thought it was, but I wasn't comfortable enough stating that to you. But that's it. You know, and that's a good example of the variations of plants that we as humans have come to use and be able to create subsistence with. You know, they were having trouble with the potato, so they went to an alternate source that wasn't affected by that disease organism that Tom was referring to. It's you know, sweet potatoes are very similar, but they are more localized. You know, if you get out of the southeastern part of the United States, they're not grown because of their suitability to that type of production. I bought some sweet potatoes yesterday from a produce market that was an early harvest that had come out of Alabama. North Carolina is the largest sweet potato producer in the country, and they won't begin their harvest until, probably another month, about the first or second week in October, and they'll go through a while. And there is a potential problem with this tropical storm that's coming. If it puts a large volume of water in that southeastern part of North Carolina, in those sandy, high organic soils, that there may be a considerable loss in the sweet potato crop, because those fields tend to flood. And sweet potatoes that are carbohydrates that have high sugar contents don't do well in excessively wet conditions. So,
Do you know
hopefully that.
grow
Go
regular
ahead.
potatoes?
I didn't hear you.
Do you know what it takes to grow like white potatoes?
You're talking about, when you say white potato, you're talking about what we call an Irish potato?
Sure.
You talking,
Russet.
what?
I did, the one that when you break it open, it's white.
Oh, they're all like that.
Yeah, anything but a sweet.
Exactly. Right.
Okay, yeah, a lot of those are grown in this area. There used to be a considerable, production of that type of potato on the mountain area just west of us, the higher elevations, because of they were very well suited to the climate up there. You'd have high sunlight, but not too high a temperature, and then at night you'd get cooler temperatures. And the high photosynthetic activity that occurred with the daylight production and then the cooler temperatures at night would create a situation where you store the carbohydrates and sugars in those roots. And the Kennebec was the standard variety that was used. Sometimes it was called a cobbler. It was a different potato, a different variety. But those potatoes were very desirable coming off of this mountain range that's immediately west of us.
How deep have to be?
Go ahead.
How deep do the roots have to be?
Normally, when you plant that potato, you plant a seed piece. In other words, you take a potato, normal sized potato, and you cut it into 3 or 4 pieces. As long as you've got 1 or 2 eyes on each piece, you'll plant them 4 or 5 inches in the ground. You usually plant them after or about the time of your frost-free day in our area. They will sprout and emerge with a very lush, green, succulent stem. And they'll grow up 8 to 10 inches tall. And the normal production here is to hill them up a little bit after that. You want to pull dirt into them so that your potatoes are in that bottom 5 or 6, 7 inches of soil. And it usually requires a pretty high organic matter. A good rich soil is the one that's best, because that is usually more friable or loose, and it lets the potato expand and grow in a uniform fashion. If it's like some of the land around my house at high clay content, it's usually compacted and the potato is usually distorted. It'd be kind of oblong or crooked or something of that type. Because of that soil compaction, it doesn't allow it to expand normally. Potatoes, the vine will grow up, usually reach 15 to 18 inches tall, and it'll produce a white flower. And if that flower, under ideal conditions, is pollinated, you will actually produce a seed that can be planted back instead of using a seed piece. But that's kind of rare. Most people, it's a pod that very much resembles the pod on a horse nettle or a briar that you may be familiar with. But that will produce a seed. It's rare to do it, and it's not the best way to produce or grow potatoes. Used to be that a Kennebec or a cobbler was a standard variety of potato that were grown by most gardeners. Some of the commercial production up in the upper Midwest, there in Washington State and Idaho, they're growing a brand called Russet, which is your standard baking potato that you may get in Outback or somewhere, or you can buy them in local grocery stores. Then you have the opportunity to buy the red potato. It's just a difference in the color of the flesh, but it has a little differences in the flavor. And 15 to 20 years ago, they came with a yellow fleshed one. Yellow internal. It was a variety called Yukon Gold. And people will tell you that it's a little more buttery flavor and things of that type. You know, it's up to your imagination as to whether it is. There are actually now some purple ones that you can get, the purple skin potato.
Yes.
Potato production. Go ahead.
No, what were you saying? He was hearing you were saying something, and
The purple potatoes are pretty good, and they're purple through and through, They're usually about that size. Smaller?
They're relatively small.
Yeah. They're pretty good. I think they're a little bit sweeter than a russet, than the most regular potatoes.
Are you aware that you can make any of your potatoes sweeter?
No?
The potato structure itself is high starch
Yes.
content. And if you want to make a potato sweeter, place it in a refrigerator for 3 or 4 weeks, and you will have a conversion of the starch to sugars.
Oh, interesting.
And if you want to make French fries that are extremely brown, refrigerate the potato, then for 3 or 4 weeks, and let that sugar increase in it. Then you slice it just like you would normally and fry it. And that increased sugar content is going to make that potato brown much faster than it will otherwise.
Caramelization.
Is there any special potato that would be better for making curly fries? Or is there a special pearl peeler thingy?
Yeah.
It depends more on the way it's cut and the time. As we talk about potatoes, there is so much difference in the way they're handled, in the way that you can treat them and manipulate them.
Do you have an entire class just on potatoes that would sing?
Oh, you could have an entire class. One of and you have a difference in the time the potatoes are harvested. If they're harvested before the plant, or the green portion of the plant fully dies down, if it still has some viability to it, the peel on that potato will not be as thick. It'll tend to slip, but that's what you'll call a new potato. And it's not it'll have a little different flavor than one that's fully mature or been a storage potato. So it's quite different. For the past 4 or 5 months, I've been getting what's called a California long white. It is a new potato that's coming out of California that's been harvested, and it's nearly as white as the sheets of paper that you ladies have on your desk in front of you. And but it's a new potato, and it cooks differently than the others. My wife likes to slice those real thin and put them in the microwave and cook them a little bit, and then put thin onion on top of it and bake it and with a little bit of olive oil. It creates a different flavor, and it's just a different use for a potato. But these potatoes we're talking about are staples, along with the cassava you were talking about. Staples in a lot of diets for folks, throughout the world. And they are really unique in some ways, and they are so versatile. There's so many things you can do with them. That purple one that you're talking about, people have used it very extensively in potato salad. It makes something that looks totally different.
That's a good idea.
All right. Yeah, it's good. And there is a purple sweet potato also.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's highly desired by some of the Oriental groups or some of the Indian folks. They prefer that one. It's a little bit harder to grow than a normal red or white flesh sweet potato, but it's Whole Foods. These specialty stores usually carry because it's an upscale price product and so forth. I don't particularly like them. I've tried them, but I don't see any advantage of them over the normal red flesh sweet potato. But you have different uses for the products that we call sweet potato. Normally the red flesh, the yellow one, whichever you want to call it, is used for baking and sweet potato fries and things of that type. But it's the standard that most people think about. In certain areas, the white sweet potato is very highly desirable for people that make sweet potato pies. They like that one because of the consistency of it and the flavor that it has. You know, it's just, it's a local thing, that I try to take advantage of with the produce market that I've got, because the more versatility, more varied things that you have, the more people that you're able to serve, so. Any more tater questions?
You know, you can buy a potato curler on Amazon for $20.
Yeah. They are, I don't know whether it'd be worth it or not, but depends on what you're doing.
No problem.
I do know that if you're selling like homemade fries and you've got one of those curler things, it pays for itself to do that.
It will. It will.
That'd be so
And if you're gonna do it, I'd recommend you refrigerate your potatoes for a little while to make them much browner and crisper. It'd be a good test question, wouldn't it? How to make curly fries.
Yeah, and I guess refrigerating and making actually curl easier when you're using the things that won't mush up. So you want to.
Yep.
So.
Thanks, Mr. John.
Yeah.
This week in cooking. No.
Well, I mean, it all factors in.
They ain't eating.
Yeah.
We don't need to be curling.
As we're talking about plants and the use of plants, the diversity of what we can use is only left up to your imagination. So in my eyes, a very undesirable product is a spaghetti squash. But I sell the things because certain folks want that particular product. And they're using it in lieu of a noodle. They'll bake that, and then it's got a stringy texture in the center of it, and they'll pull that out and use it like they would pasta or of some sort in dishes. But I'd rather have spaghetti than to have a noodle. I mean a squash. So anyway. But you know, that's just part of the diversity that we're able to do, and we can do that by the use of different types of plants and trying different things. Who would have ever thought about making curly fries? So. All right, a term that we need to make ourselves aware of is one called the human footprint, and that's an estimate of the land area needed by an individual, a geographic area, or a socio-political group to feed the world's population. Crop production is we're going to reach a point in the not too near future where it will be really stressful to feed the world's population. The time that we've heard is going to be by about 2050. The population is going to be large enough that it's going to be extremely hard to feed the world's population. So,
as things said right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, population is increasing, much greater in other areas of the world than what it is in this country. But you know, it's going to take a lot more land, and we don't have more land. So we've got to become more efficient with the use of our crops in the way that we're doing it. That gets the high spots on this chapter 2. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we didn't cover, but you know that gets to the majority of this discussion about the biomes and so forth. You guys got any questions or concerns about what we've done in chapter 2? If you do, please share them, or if I haven't covered it, send me a note or an email or Instagram or whatever it might take.
I'll look chapter 3.
Okay. Otherwise, we're about out of time for today, so let me know. Enjoyed the potato discussion, though. I thought it was helpful.
It was nice.
I'll keep you up to date on when I do curly fries.
Okay, that'll be good.
Okay.
Make a YouTube video filming you cooking, making them. There you go.
Bring some to class and we can see.
That's a lot better than tater tots. I don't care much for those.
All I need is the potatoes and curler and.
Okay. I'm not much for most potatoes, so oh well.
I like potatoes. I can eat potatoes for a meal and then
I love them, but my wife's taking them. She's sort of my food police. She's basically taking them off my diet. She doesn't like me to eat potatoes.
Potatoes, shakes, potatoes. Those will never.
It's a drop.
What was it in the potato that can't be in your diet, Mr. Ayers?
I have a little bit of a blood sugar problem, and the carbohydrate conversion to sugar elevates my blood sugar. So and my wife is an RN, and she also has been deputized as a food police in our home. So she's kind of, and I can't fault it. I just, when I reach for the potato, she's taking potato chips completely out, but she doesn't know what I eat in my truck as I travel back and forth. I just love potato chips.
I'm sorry about that, John.
I know, I am too, but it's just one of those things I have to deal with.
Does that mean you can't have linguine?
Well, in small quantities. She worked a little later than normal yesterday, and I went to the house and fixed some spaghetti, but I had to use whole wheat spaghetti, which she thought was acceptable, but.
Well, I'm sorry.
I am too, but it's just one of those facts of life. It's just what happens when you get fat and old.
So I have a question about the potatoes that has more to do with the growing, like corn.
Okay.
Corn, what pollinates the corn that has a lot of effect on the kernels. Is that hold true at all with the potato? I've heard some people said it was, but in theory, I didn't see how pollination would affect the tuber.
I don't think it will. Now, that little thing I was talking about with the potato flower, if it were to cross-pollinate and you were able to salvage that seed, in theory, that could be effective. But just from the plant itself and the production of the tuber or the root, it's not going to affect it at all.
I had somebody tell me that they planted one kind of potato and they planted two types and they thought they cross-pollinated because both of the tubers that they dug looked the same, but I found it hard to believe that that was actually what happened. I thought maybe somebody had crossed the planting.
There's more likelihood that they got their potatoes mixed up than there is a cross-pollination. Cross-pollination will not affect that. It's only going to affect the end product of the seed that would have potentially come from that little berry thing. And it's rare to ever see that form. I've seen it a few times, but I actually quit growing potatoes a long time ago because I was too lazy to dig them. I could buy what few potatoes we needed in a timely fashion rather than digging a volume of potatoes. That's in our soil. That's kind of hard, dirty work. So, but potatoes, I do love potatoes. I'm not supposed to eat them, but I do.
And it's for some reason it's hard to beat those fresh, homegrown potatoes.
It is. It is. And that's, in my eyes, that's true with most anything, any vegetable. The homegrown, fresh tomato, we've been really enjoying tomatoes for the last period of time, but my little patch at home's about to expire, so I'm having to resort to other stuff. Tomatoes and potatoes and sweet corn, cucumbers and squash, I can survive on for.
Yeah, we enjoy the years that we grow potatoes, canning them and eating the mashed potatoes from a can, home canned potatoes all year.
Yeah. And, it goes back to just the way that you're able to handle them. And I'd be willing to bet that you're talking about canned potatoes, you're probably the only one in that room that has had canned potatoes.
No.
No?
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I've had canned potatoes. It was just store-bought.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You haven't canned them yourself. And, you know, in my 70-some years, we never canned potatoes at home.
Yeah.
Never, you know, we would harvest them and put them in a basement with. There we run out of time.
Good.
There's South Boston.
Yeah, good morning.
Hello.
We're the IT guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
see you guys.
Well, okay, well, our class is finishing up. Anyway, bye, John. I'll reconnect in a couple minutes.